Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gaeta Siciliano from Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Today we are so lucky to have an extraordinary guest, Dr. Michael Montgomery. He's an existential psychoanalyst with international expertise in complex trauma, extreme states, addiction, and conflict resolution. He trained at Regent's University London, the Tavistock and Portman, and the Anna Freud Centre. Dr. Montgomery is the founder of Peacefire.us, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering dialogue and understanding between individuals from diverse and often opposing backgrounds. In addition to his private practice, he leads Perform 23, collaborating with specialists in movement, dance, and music to create alternative access points to healing and community, most notably supporting Fifth Element and Plan B in post-conflict Belfast. He is a regular contributor to the Society for Existential Analysis annual conference, the RD Laing Symposium, and ISPS-US. So this is where I met you, Dr. Montgomery. What I love about the ISPS conferences is that it's a real true union of lived experience people and clinicians. And it was so exciting to come across your work then, because I just saw that, wow, this is an area where people are actually doing the work. And that was so exciting that I saw that you really understand that there's a disconnect. There's an inability for people to heal, perhaps based on the model itself. So let's get into this. One of the last things that I saw that you did, that you enlightened me about, was this last ISPS seminar that you gave called Psychophobia, Psychosis, Agency, and Radical Freedom, given in June of this year. And it's based on a paper that you wrote. So without further ado, let's just get into your background a little bit so that people know who we're speaking with. You're from Ireland, an Irish citizen. Can you just start with your background and how you discovered somebody like, say, R.D. Laing through this awakening that you had?
Okay. Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. And yes, I remember this wonderful ball of energy rushing towards me after my ISPS presentation. So it's a real privilege and an honor to be here. I know you do incredible work on the podcast.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I was a child of the Troubles, as it's called, which was an armed conflict really between the British, the Irish nationalists or Republicans, and the Unionists or Loyalists in Belfast. So yeah, it was pretty dicey. It's informed my work, obviously, in terms of complex trauma. So how do I cover a biography to get to this point? I guess I was always interested in the mind, and I was also interested in an answer to all this death and destruction. So I grew up in the Christian church, and at around the age of 15, it stopped working. It didn't make any sense. It didn't hold the answers for me. Right? My family are all like wild Christians and, have all these relationships with Jesus and stuff. I didn't. So it was a very lonely sort of path to try and get some sort of solace. I believed that somewhere on the planet there was some sort of spiritual vibrancy. And coincidentally, I found that in Buddhism. So I had this thread running through of sort of meditation, the mind, the Tibetans, et cetera, et cetera. My first career was in business. I was in advertising and marketing. And then I got more and more into Buddhism. and I kind of renounced it all and went and lived in a Buddhist retreat center for a
Wow.
couple of years, and communities for about another 3. So very much in the mind traditions. At the end of that path, I felt I had the answers spiritually, and I thought, right, I want my life to be about other people and to live a sort of altruistic path. So I went to college for the first time at 32, believe it or not, and I studied social work. This was in London, and I was drawn to mental health work, and very quickly I was completely horrified and shocked by what I saw and what I experienced. I just I couldn't get my head around it.
Yeah.
Now, I had an early experience of a friend who, when I first met him, he told me his story by 3 o'clock in the morning at this party. And he said he had been incarcerated against his will for 3 months. And I could not understand how society could do this to this incredible, I call him a Shanachie, an Irish storyteller. And then he told me something that changed my life. He said, in the course of the 3 months, no one asked me my story. And that, as somebody who loves stories, it just blew my mind. How was that possible? So I'm jumping around here a lot, but really I went on a quest to try and understand really the nature of that. Why are people treated so badly in the system? Why are people not engaged with? Why are people who are deemed to be in extreme states not communicated with? Even this is like in 2006, 2007, there was still this pervasive attitude that you didn't engage with people who were in a state of psychosis.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything iatrogenic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It was wild. So at the time, very luckily, I was in this place of kind of despair and pulling my hair out. Adrian Lang's son, his biography was republished, and I just happened to pick it up off the shelf, and I read it, and it was like, oh my goodness.
Wow.
It was like Ronnie Lang's ghost was speaking to me, and he was saying things to me like, it's these things that you see are not the side effects of medication, they are the effects of medication. It's like, wow. I was seeing people who presented a particular way 1 minute, and then 3 months later they might have been like incredibly overweight, an unhealthy level of weight, a whole range of different problems, lethargy. And it was so obvious.
Yeah.
But I was alone in what I was seeing until I read Artie Lang, and then it was, oh my goodness, it all makes complete sense. So in my own sort of wheelhouse, I became a bit of an advocate and a bit of an activist. And, I would do things like they had this horrible system in the UK where a patient would shuffle in to a ward round, and there could be like 15 people in it, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, psychologists, trainees. And then they would be like questioned. Right? I can't think of anything more frightening. So I had people coming in. I had one woman come in, and they would say she was incoherent, right, or whatever. And I knew she was absolutely hilarious and on point, but she was one question behind because of the medication. So if you're not listening correctly, it sounds like, right? So the sort of things I used to do, like one day I said to the wardrobe, I said, just indulge me here. And she had a demo tape, and I put on her demo tape. Everybody's looking at me like I've lost it. And I said, this is the person that you're going to see next. Right. So I was trying to bring the humanity into these spaces. But it was not without challenge. The other story I tell is when I first entered that space, there was this sense that psychiatry was using all this lingo. Right, so nobody was going to listen to you. So I went home, I bought the Oxford Handbook of Psychiatry, and I read it over a weekend. And I went in the Monday, and I started using the lingo of psychiatry. And within about 2 weeks, the lead clinician would call on me first to give input. So in a way, that was the start of me realizing in order to be effective in the system, you have to understand the system.
Yeah.
Right? You can't stand on the outside screaming. You have to go right in, learn how it works. Somebody said to me once, you have to be able to you have to be able to construct the system before you deconstruct it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was a really good teaching, and that stuck with me. So that path has really continued since then, and it's evolved, and my thinking's evolved, and I guess really appraising the system and seeing where it is going and what the issues are and why people are not getting the care that they need, and also why they're becoming dependent on the system.
Yeah.
So as a therapist, you said about the ISPS. I learned that the disconnect was much wider than I thought, because in my naivety, I thought all clinicians were practicing like me. I would usually start a session by saying, my job is to make myself redundant. I actually don't want to be a psychotherapist. I want to live in a world where you don't need therapists.
Yeah.
That is not how other people were practicing.
No.
Right. So we could get into that, in deeper and technical detail. But so I've learned a hell of a lot from the survivors movement. So once I realized many of them saw clinicians as part of the problem, I wanted to really understand that more. And I learned a hell of a lot from my dialogue, and I've sort of incorporated that into my work. So I'm endlessly grateful. I feel much happier hanging around people from the survivors movement than the general public. But I would say, people who self-identify, not everybody who's a survivor self-identifies. I think that's important to say too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you, it is a rare thing. Like, you are kind of a golden egg. It's not common that people who have studied along this line, I don't know what it is, if it's the sense that, I'm an expert, and this is how I was taught, and it's just that I hope that anybody who sees this, who is possibly on the other side and in your camp, who are trying to help, feel as though that they could get real true guidance from your perspective, because it is been my life has been, I can literally tell you, has been unbearable until the last few years, when I finally took it upon myself to taper. It took me 2.5 years. I've been off now for 2 years, and my life has come back to me. But I am 53, and my experience where I was first medicated happened when I was 22. So for 30 years, I've been begging people to see that this is an inhumane way to treat psychological distress. And yet, things can be even done on the inside, because let's face it, we get there for some reason. Right? We get on the inside for some reason. So just hearing how you approach the person in distress, and how you, I guess, hold space for a different analysis, or different way of looking at it. And I think it has to do with this existential approach. That can be the biggest change for it. So in other words, as a psychiatric survivor, I was always into the idea of abolition, like destroying the system. But is that the best way? Probably not, because people need help, right? There are reasons why people have to, be removed from their environment, say, or, put in a situation that's safer for them in a state that they're in. Yet, if people can learn how to navigate the system, and then on the inside make these decisions that are independent in thought, rather than based on these exclusionary tactics, as if we're not human once we get in that state. You actually got published in Journal of the Society for Existential Analysis. So I want to have a link to that in the show notes. And you start off with just explaining how this guy, Sam, is just, having a crisis.
There was a couple of people, and was it the one I started with?
Yes.
The sort of spiritual emergence. He was incarcerated against his will for 2 years.
Yeah.
And forcibly medicated, and a more beautiful human being you will not meet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And consistent. So if you take that as an example, right? So he had a sort of huge spiritual experience where he felt he had communicated with God and Jesus, right? His family were from a different religious background.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was going on, right? He was in quite an elevated state, so he was sort of handing out religious flowers and stuff because he was pumped.
Yeah.
He had this
Right.
life-changing experience, right? So he ended up, cut a long story short, he ended up being in an institution for 2 years, right? When he came out, I worked with him pretty intensively in the family. I do a lot of family work, which really has changed my whole view of clinical work. But to cut a long story short, as he sort of settled down and found trust again in other people, his religious experience didn't go away at all, right? So, from a psychiatry point of view, they would label him in a certain way, but he was absolutely consistent, right, in his views. Now, psychiatrists mightn't like his views, they mightn't connect with his views, they mightn't believe his views, but they're his views
Right.
and they're his business, right? And that's up to him. Right? The other thing that I see, I'd call myself maybe more of an advanced clinician, is when you see what you might describe as very complex presentations, they're not singular, right? You often have some sort of suffering in terms of let's just say an elevation, but there's often a neurodiversity in there too. Or let me put that another way: people are different.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is people who don't have the breadth of openness, right, the ability to phenomenologically take somebody in, they try and put people in a box that they understand.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly limiting.
Yes.
Right. So I think I see some of the most magical, incredible people, right? I meet them when they're in a particular state. When that state starts to settle, then there's a level of complexity.
Yeah.
And I see that often that complexity has been completely misunderstood and mislabeled.
Yes.
So I think we need to do much better, right? Way, way, way better. And this work is much more advanced than the tick boxes that you see in sort of a diagnostic manual.
Yes.
And that is a huge problem.
I love how you call it McDonaldization. Here, I believe here in America, because of the insurance system, that it's not, it's all private. The check boxes are so important. And it really is so, because of that, it's so reductionist. So you really don't feel like a human being once you get on the inside. You're almost like, funneled through a system and mistreated as if you are a second-class citizen.
So McDonaldization, it's actually a sociological term. It comes from the work of George Ritzer. He wrote the McDonaldization of society. And very basically, it is what he observed was the principles of the fast food industry were becoming ubiquitous throughout society. So basically, efficiency, predictability, calculability, and control, right? So when you think of that, you think of anything, you think of gyms, you think of higher education, it sort of slipped in everywhere. And I started to see it more and more in my research. But the problem with the good things about efficiency, predictability, calculability, and control is there's unforeseen consequences or irrational consequences of rationality. And those are basically dehumanizing, de-skilling, de-responsibilizing, hard to say, and disenchantment. So basically, if you think of it, it's easier to look at something like a call center, right? So you take a task that somebody used to do, all these different tasks, and you strip it down into very basic parts, right? So you start to manualize it, de-skill it, make it more technologically adjacent, right? But if you think about it, it starts to turn people into sort of robots, right? If you've ever been on a call center and you go off script, the poor person doesn't really know what to do because they're not trained. So what I saw in my research was that I discovered kind of some of this accidentally. Basically, clinicians were taking less clinical risk because they were worried about accountability and control, which meant that they weren't actually going into the space of healing. They were just ticking the boxes.
Right.
So I was very lucky. Donna Dustin, I think, was a bit of a follower of George, and she was a mentor of mine, and she wrote the Medicalization of social care. And then I started to develop the Medicalization of therapy. So it's kind of ubiquitous. And I was in a clinic for a period there, and I just watched it getting worse. You see, from one side, it makes complete sense. You want accountability and control and all these other things, right? If you're trying to manage a busy clinic, but it's not without consequence.
Right. And it shouldn't only be that. That should be the lowest thing on the totem pole. Like big deal. Like I'm a teacher. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to do too in terms of paperwork, right? But that's not where you make the difference. You make the difference by connecting to the kid.
Here's it in one sentence. Humans aren't hamburgers. Right.
Right.
So you're taking, if this is the issue. If you take medicine's amazing, right? If there's something wrong with you, you go and get an X-ray, or you get, some sort of scan, and they diagnose. Generally, it's pretty good, right? And you look at the advances that we have made in medicine over the years, it's incredible. You look at the advances in psychiatry over the years, and it's horrendous.
Yeah.
Because it's the wrong paradigm.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Right.
We're talking about humanity, the spirit, living life, engagement, relationships, and we're hitting it with the hammer of medicine.
Right.
And then we're medicating the shit out of it.
Yeah.
Right. So the paradigm's kind of wrong. But I just wanted to go back to the psychophobia, Medicalization, and how people treat it. Here's a great example. I remember walking into a clinic, and it was my first day, and I'm slightly hypervigilant. So I noticed two members of staff flinch. I could see them tighten up when I walked in. I think I'm a pretty presentable guy, right? And when they realized I was a clinician and it was my first day, I could see them relax. Because they thought that potentially I was, someone looking for mental health services. That's psychophobia in a nutshell.
Yes.
And that's psychophobia from people who are meant to be in the helping profession. So we could get into that a lot. But the Medicalization is really the context that we are in. And I think it's getting worse. And I think it's completely moving in the wrong direction. And I see clinicians who are crying out for deeper understandings.
Really?
Right? So you're going back to what you said at the beginning. This is how people are trained.
Yes.
And again, you can stop me for jumping around a bit, but I remember being in a clinical meeting, and I was challenging polypharmacy. Polypharmacy is a bugbear of mine, right? So I was challenging the polypharmacy in the clinic, and the clinical director said, "Oh, that's not the policy in the clinic." So I started cutting and pasting people's prescriptions into the chat.
Wow.
Right? And there was this whole kerfuffle with the management and all this. But here's the clincher. I started to get private WhatsApp, or not WhatsApp, what do you call it? Zoom, the chat.
Yeah.
I started to get these private messages.
Right.
Oh, Michael, you're so right. This is what's happening here. Thanks for speaking up. So I replied, well, why aren't you speaking up? Right. Why aren't you saying something? So what they said? Said things like, oh, I just got my license and I don't want to rock the boat, or, oh, I don't really want to. So we live in a very strange space where even in a very right on clinic, people are afraid to speak to power.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating. Now, I've been around a long time. In fairness to the clinic, they gave me free rein, and they gave me a lot of respect to do what I did. So I probably had a bigger voice. But even so, social workers, it's their job to advocate for the individual. It's in the social work values. So you have to say, why are people not doing more?
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, people are getting sidetracked by other issues when actually that they, in my opinion, they should be focused on the issue that they can do the most about,
Well,
which
I
is,
think it is interesting. It's such a great question. Why aren't they doing more? Because I'm hearing you and I'm saying, and I remember being at the ISPS conference, seeing all these people that cared, and I'm thinking, is it that? I mean, again, I'm trying to think of institutionalizations, right? Or institutions. I am in an education institution. There's pushback in ways we're always pushing back. I'm curious as to why the medical any person who gets into some kind of medical, you know, institution of thought becomes completely, strangled by it. But I think you nail it by bringing up the psychophobia because it's the narrative underneath it, what they're learning, that is the thing that's probably freaking them out because they think that there's so much liability involved with treating a person like a human being and giving them a little space. See, this is the problem. People don't the psychiatry is so worried about, at least in America, I think, liability, that it's like they don't want to give too much like room for that person to feel free or start making their own start having their own agency again, because then if something should go wrong, they're going to have to be held accountable for that person like kind of falling off the wagon. Okay, but the problem is people should have the right to live their own lives. I mean, if I see a person who's, for instance, in Western medicine, without it being, mental related, it's physical related, right? This person is definitely on a course for a heart attack, but they keep eating, the wrong foods. There is no structure that makes that person that forces that person to have fruits and vegetables for three, like literally injects only fruits and vegetables into that person to make sure that that person doesn't die and kill himself, okay, with the wrong eating. But in psychiatry, it's like this control of what is happening in the mind, and they have no idea what's going on in individual minds, okay? But this feeling that, okay, they show this certain amount of behaviors that are risky, therefore it's much better to over medicate them, give them, take away their agency entirely and not give them the ability to fall on themselves. If they should fail in their attempt at rebuilding their life, like, it's okay for people to make a mess of their lives. And I say this with compassion because I wish so many times that they just let me be and let me make a mistake and let me learn on my own and then recorrect. People do this. People who are not labeled and who are not medicated can do this as a human being in this world. They can recorrect, they can make a mistake. And so I feel like part of this almost like authoritarian. I've been talking about this authoritarian treatment inside these facilities since 1994. And now in America, this authoritarianism is like rampant. And I feel a lot, I've been speaking out about this forever with how it's kind of like, I almost feel it was tested on the mentally ill, this treatment. So
yeah, so my view on it shifted. I've moved now to, this is a human rights issue.
yes.
So I would like to take it away from the area of mental health and say, look, any citizen in America or even non-citizen, this could happen to you.
Yes.
Very, very easily. And given the corporate nature of a lot of these healthcare companies, it could happen to you a hell of a lot easier than you may think.
Right.
Right. And once you get into that system, it's really hard to get out. But your point about authority, I remember being in London and you have these sort of team meetings. It was community mental health. It was actually really good. in comparison to other spaces I've been in. But I remember they were having this debate about this woman who was lighting a lot of candles in her apartment. And it was a serious conversation about whether she should be involuntary sectioned or not because she was a risk to herself for lighting candles. Now, ethically, that's a tricky one, right? That is a tricky one if someone is careless, right? But that is kind of the level that people can get into into people's lives. Now, I think it's fair for us both to say, these can be complex issues when
Absolutely.
it comes to risk and care and protective force and all the rest of it. And also, I wanted to throw in, the word I use for medication is pharmacon. It's this idea of it can be a poison and a cure.
Yeah.
So for some people, medication can be life-saving in the short term. So my view again on this is now crystallized on around what I'm against is people being medicated when they don't need it.
Right.
People being medicated with too heavy doses when they don't need it, and people being left on medication for too long. So those are the three pillars, if you like.
Yes.
It's not anti-medication by any means. I would prefer if people didn't reach to the prescription pad so quick.
Yeah.
There's definitely alternatives out there. And I would so I'm into agency and people having freedom, but true agency is only there if people can make informed decisions. And I think what we have seen and what I've learned certainly from survivors is they weren't informed of the risks of the medication. That's a huge issue. You see people, they have a problem sleeping and they're prescribed a heavy benzo,
right?
But they're not told of the risk. And then, weeks later, they've got a serious problem on their hands.
Yes.
The truth is, Jen, some of these psychiatrists aren't informed.
Yeah,
you only have to look at the opiate epidemic when they think they're telling everybody it's not addictive. Right. A lot of them, they're not trained to think critically. They believe they're doing the right thing. They believe they're helping people. They've kind of drank the Kool-Aid, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I've had arguments with senior psychiatrists. I'll give you one example. Young man was snorting Xanax and Ritalin, right? And on he was sort of mandatory antipsychotic injection. So I argued this guy, is abusing both these meds, and it's just not serving him in any way. I think the psychiatrist said something like, "Oh no, the drug company said you can prescribe Ritalin and Xanax." So it's like, what? What? There was no common sense, right? There's a closing of a rank. So I've had more battles with psychiatrists than you can imagine, and registered nurses, right? But there is a thing of, even in my experience, the most creative and critical, there'll always still be a psychiatrist, right? So they'll always stand by the medication over letting go and having an alternative. And I think that's where R.D. Laing really was different.
Yeah.
He wasn't against people, whatever you need to get through the night, but he was very against the forcible use of medication and ECT and all these different things. So.
Right. It's interesting because, like I said, I've been fighting back against this for so long, and I hear that this is a training thing. It's how they're trained, to see a certain thing. But I'm wondering, like, how do you penetrate that? And I think what it again, and I want to restate, and I want to make sure that it's clear that I do know that certain things, and I've experienced it now as an adult, right? I used to be the kid who was experiencing it, and my parents were making these decisions for me. But as an adult, having, older kids, my friends with their kids, they've, gone through times when intervention was needed. Whether it was like either cutting or, serious, behaviors that were endangering, their lives. Right. Sure. So, but me being me having a guiding, I guess, presence in my friends' lives, reminding them, please be careful with these medications, because once you get on, it's very hard to get off. Then you have to try to taper and da. So they've managed to taper, have their children be on this stuff, but then kind of self advocate with the medications management team, whoever it was, with the doctors, that they would taper. So they were able to advocate for their own children to do this. Okay. The problem is, this is a rare occurrence. There is no help in America. There's no tapering strips. I love how the UK has now, come out with that, which is a great advance. There is no discussion about it. So hearing your kind of breakdown with the philosophy behind much of what is taught, I think, with that the psychophobia, I think is so important, because maybe if it doesn't have to be completely destroyed, the system, in order for it to be rebuilt. Maybe if these things were injected into the system, this rethinking, right, about, the human mind. I say this because this is where I wrote this book, and I'm trying to get it published now. And it's like, this is where, and it's, again, not as crazy as you think. That's the whole thing. But the point is, I had this mystical experience coming back from India, and they didn't even, you said after 2 years, they didn't even ask him, what these experiences were. That person that you gave an example of, I was barely ever asked about my experiences and what, because it wasn't real to them. It was fake. And I think one of the biggest problems with the training today is the concept of materialism inside the mental health industry. It's not, you cannot reduce human ideas to pathways that are chemical in the brain. I mean, we know this now, and people are coming out against this in with lots of new studies, right? People are always trying to debunk this. They had that beautiful study with Horowitz a couple years ago that really shed light on the fact that the chemical imbalance theory is just something that was told by the pharmaceutical companies. But it is because they wanted to make it a legitimate science, psychiatry, that they then took on this biomedical model. And if you can still use, in the name, in the approach of Joanna Moncrief, which she says that you can have drug, therapies, but know that it's drug. It's the drug can help. Just and alcohol can help somebody with social anxiety, right? But it's not serving any purpose of healing. So for us to say that, the whole model is around just this, it's almost like a drug factory. It's really not doing anything except controlling a person's behavior.
Well, it's big business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very good argument. So if you take a great example of this, kid goes to college, right? And people are handing out stimulants. So they take a stimulant, and then it's like, oh my God, I can concentrate for 2 days. I must have ADD. So they go to the doctor, right, 2 minutes, write a script. Suddenly they've got the meds. It's not that the meds don't help with the concentration. It's just the leap to say that person had that thing. Right. So in the same way, there are meds that some of them my experience is a lot of them, especially when you're in the area of psychosis, don't work out well. Right. That's been my experience for a lot of people. For some people they do. So for some people it can be really, really settling. I preferred when we called them tranquilizers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I felt that was a much better, okay, I'm in a state, give me a tranquilizer, right, calm me down, help, right? Used like that, very effective, right? But I think, drugs, drugs have a function and they do certain things. That's very different, as you say, of what is below in terms of healing. Now, what I experience is people believe they have this issue. They're given this drug and they think this drug is going to take that issue away.
Right.
When all it does is tranquilize the issue. Right. If people are on medication for a long term, it can actually end up doing the opposite. Right. If you take Xanax, wow, if somebody's freaking out getting on a plane, take a Xanax, amazing, get on the plane. Take Xanax for 4 weeks straight, you get a very different experience.
Yeah.
Right. The research shows actually the anxiety gets worse. So
yes.
My big thing about drugs, all drugs, including alcohol, is we don't respect them.
Yes.
Right. Alcohol is an extremely powerful drug. We don't respect it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about the truth about what it does to the body and what withdrawals like, even for the average wine drinker.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana, we don't respect it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Super powerful drug. The cream of the cream, prescription drugs, pure, aren't cut with anything. We don't respect it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're prescribed like M&Ms.
Yeah.
Right. That's a core issue that I have with it. Going back to your experience in India, if I was working with you on that, I wouldn't be surprised you had like a shattering experience. And India
exactly.
I mean, I've been a couple of times. It's overwhelming.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Totally.
So, but where's the tick box for that?
Mm-hmm.
Right, there isn't one. That's the problem. So we have to put you in a box we think we understand.
Mm-hmm.
And McDonaldization means that we need to do it quickly and controllably and predictably. Right. So you're put through the system in that way. So I think I like this idea of metamodernism that I've been talking about, and it's this idea of acknowledging where we are and how difficult it is, but also having some hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you think back, not so long ago, we used to smoke cigarettes on airplanes.
Mm.
We used to throw our rubbish on the street, have a picnic, and throw. There's a lovely scene in Mad Men where they have a picnic and he just lifts the picnic and throws all the rubbish sort of on the right.
Oh
so
my gosh.
Things can change.
Yes.
Harvey Milk in San Francisco came up with the idea of putting dog poop in a plastic bag. Before that, you should be poop every. Things can change.
Yeah.
The Maudsley Hospital in London last year published the first de-prescribing manual,
which is great.
Right. So I think you have to hold hope that things can change.
Yes. And to be fair and to speak to that very directly, things I think took a big turn after COVID, because a lot of people who were just ordinary people who never really maybe were in the mental health, industry before. They didn't need services before. All of a sudden, people were like, oh my God, I can't take this. I need mental health services. So people were a little less like, it was less divided up into the us and them, right? It was almost like, we're all in this. We're all in this. So then it became much more humanized. So I guess what it is the way to, listen, this is my fight in human rights too, just like kind of reminding everybody that we need to humanize this journey again, and not get so lost in all of these measures that were created for purposes of financial issues or just some kind of institutionalization that kind of like is the power center that kind of distributes all these services. Private service, you have a private practice as well, correct?
So don't hold me to this, but I try and do most of my work for free.
Wow.
So I have a very...
You're like something of an angel.
Thank you. I don't hold up to that, but so I have a very boutique practice where I will charge celebrities and people who can maybe perhaps afford it, but something very specialist. And then I like to offer people who wouldn't normally be able to access quality care free.
That's amazing.
And that's very rewarding to be able to do that.
Mm.
I've always done that, to be honest. Always done a Robin Hood,
Oh,
situation. But yeah, I feel I'm very privileged to be able to do that.
that's great.
But you said something about us and them. So from a psychophobia point of view, I think people know we are them, and that's why they're psychophobic. They
Yeah.
know I could easily be that person. I could easily, break down in any sort of way.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to look at. I don't want to be that. It's a bit like the homeless, or
Yeah.
unhoused, uh, same sort of relationship. But we are all humans. Where I would be, in the lineage of R.D. Laing, I believe we're all on a spectrum.
Yeah.
So I don't believe these categories are isolated and unique. I think people deal with their suffering in different ways, or their mind deals with it in different ways. For some people, it might be a sort of depressed state. For other people, it might be more of an elevated state. For other
Yeah.
people, it might be more. So I don't make these distinctions. Therefore, I treat everyone the same.
Yeah. And I also, I looking at the DSM, to me, it just looks like a bunch of ways people cope. I know that, so much of psychiatry, or I shouldn't say psychiatry, psychology, okay? It kind of bounced back between like a Jungian perspective, which was like that collective unconscious, right? There's this whole like inner world that we have to acknowledge is there. And then it became just very, like clinical. Where did that change take place? Things that are just much more in alignment with medicalization as opposed to this free mind space.
Huge chunks of society are wedded to the cult of scientific materialism.
Yeah.
So basically, the line I use, if it's not measurable, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So what happened about 30 years ago or so, the cognitive behavioral people were sort of out on the fringes of psychology. And while they were out on the fringes of psychology, they were doing research. So suddenly they came in with their research going, this works really well for depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
The arrogant, stuffy old psychoanalysts weren't doing the research because they had the dominance of
Yeah.
everything. And suddenly they were caught with their pants down, so to
Right.
speak. In London, some Lord economic guy, I think it was Lord Leonard, he came up with a depression report. So again, linked to capitalism, he worked out that if you got people off benefits and back to work, it would pay for the therapy itself. So they were taking CBT, which wasn't the delivery model of CBT wasn't like 6 sessions, but in the UK they were offering people 6 sessions, 12 sessions with this idea of getting them back to work. So there was that, and CBT in many ways was effective in certain areas for certain people for certain things, right?
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to old stuffy old psychoanalysis, right? So it was a bit of a like, here's the new kid in town, and everybody went all in on it. But I think it was in a certain context, and it then became an assault on interiority. If you're a neuroscientist, you don't want to talk about consciousness.
Yes.
Because it'll sound woo-woo, right? You want to talk about measurable brain activity. Now, when you go full circle back to McDonaldization, CBT fits perfectly.
Yeah.
Because it's predictable, calculable, it's efficient, it's controllable, right? Suddenly you're saying, what 3 or 4 sessions a week of psychoanalysis versus 12 sessions of CBT with a start, middle, and an end. If you're procuring services, which are you going to pick? But the truth is, a good CBT clinician in London wasn't doing just CBT. They were also using the system, right? They were often doing what the patient or client needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this CBT fits very well. I mean, in London back in the day, if, your first therapist was a CD, they used to give people CD with CBT on it, and then you got the therapist. So
Oh.
all fits very well with technology, all fits well with scientific materialism, all fits well with medicalization. It doesn't speak to the depth of the human in any shape. So you mentioned existential psychoanalysis. I guess what differentiates us is we place value in the unconscious. Right? That would be the difference. That would separate us from the existentialists, and that would separate and by being existential and phenomenological, it would separate us from the traditional psychoanalysts.
So is this a like a kind of a new burgeoning field? Because I haven't heard about it as much. I mean, I've heard about these ideas, but it seems to be maybe something that can gain more momentum.
Well, I think, well, obviously existential therapy has been around for a long time, um, but I am from the new school of existential psychoanalysis that was founded by a man called Michael Guy Thompson
Mm-hmm.
and James Norwood. Michael Thompson lived with Artie Lang. He actually was his administrator for 7 years in London. He's an American, and also Nita Gage and Doug Kessner. They all had long-standing relationships with Artie Lang. So Artie Lang really was someone who basically integrated existential thought and psychoanalysis. I mean, he had connections with Jean-Paul Sartre in France, but Lang, through his own choices, never really wrote about the approach from a theoretical point of view, and I think that was Michael Thompson's contribution. He really sort of brought together, from his knowledge of Lang and his own philosophical background, a more coherent approach to it. I had been practicing for years as it's a bit of a mouthful, an existential, phenomenologically informed psychoanalyst. So meeting Michael, he helped me distill it and shorten it and make it much more accessible. So I think it is gathering a momentum, and there's a yearly training, which has been, I think it's on the third year now. So we're starting to train new people.
Oh, that's great.
Mm.
All right, that is hopeful to me because I think that in some way it's people like you. I mean, I got it's people like you that can change things. Like I got that feeling when I was at ISPS. Like, the listen, psychophobia is even there, right? Even in this place that holds space for everyone, I still felt that there's this sense that, when they're talking about the people who are the customers or the consumers, they're one type of brain. And then everyone else has got the brain that's okay. Because there's so much psychophobia that's on the other end, it's just it disables you. In order to do it their way or try it their way, you have to submit to this idea that they know more about your brain than you and your mind and the interiority of it than you yourself know about it. And there's such a self-denial process in order for you to work with their inside their system and be successful, because I was a very successful patient. Like, I did everything that they told me to do. And I lived a subpar life, and I knew it. So finally, when I said, I'm not doing this anymore, and I went and started changing things and making definite, like vocal outreach to people and a pure rejection of their system, then it was like, oh, I see the truth. So what I'm saying is, essentially, how do people get the help they need and also ask for just simple human rights within the systems that still exist?
Those are two huge questions. Oh my goodness.
It's not simple.
So when you're talking, I'm so many things that are bouncing around. Okay, so ask me, which question is it again? Ask me.
Okay, so how could somebody be within the system, get the help they need, but also ask to for their basic human rights? And I don't think the two can. I think in order to get the institutional help that's available, at least again in America.
I've experienced here, Malaysia, Ireland, London, Germany.
Okay, so there's a great. I'm sure that you've seen then a great variance between all of those things, but also there's some kind of unifying principle.
Well, I think we have to completely change the paradigm. So
Yeah, yeah,
if we were in a casino, I'm putting all my money on psychophobia,
yeah, yeah.
right? So it's like going back a second, you talked about that feeling of you being observed and judged. I call that epistemic destabilization.
Mm.
What's really going on for you? Nothing. I'm fine. I'm just really excited and creative. No, I think you're not what. So there's all these things happen in relationship, right? So it's how does the system relate to the individual?
Hmm.
At the minute, badly. And I think that has to change. And I think it can only change when we start to change the paradigm.
Right.
But the task is kind of the task is kind of huge. I'm going to give you an example. I gave a talk at an existential conference in London. I was the keynote. It was a pretty good presentation, although I
Wow.
said it myself, on psychophobia. The first question that I was asked by a clinician was, I've written this down. You used metaphors throughout, like open-heartedness, sitting on the floor with patients. I guess I'm wondering if there is a fear of being sucked into their way of being. And if so, how can you keep yourself safe from that? Is there ever a fear of contamination in some way?
Oh,
This is in 2025,
oh my goodness. Contamination. That's so perfect.
right? So in Malaysia, I remember a senior person in an organization, he initially thought mental health was contagious.
Mm,
Those two views aren't that different.
no.
One's in a developing country, the other one's in London, and it's supposedly a clinician or a trainee clinician. I wasn't sure which. So I think until we start viewing people differently, we're not going to treat them differently. So I think
Yes.
that is the task.
Yes.
So, and I think that is changing. I think people are, because it's ubiquitous, isn't it? Like what 1 in 4 people will have some sort of difficulty at some point.
Hmm.
You mentioned COVID. I think the prescription on on antidepressants and benzos went up 25%
Oh,
on
wow.
both. So, more and more people, children, the people have children. So it's kind of everywhere. So, and I think people know it's not really working. Laura Delano, she makes a very challenging argument. Perhaps it is the treatment that is causing the epidemic in mental health, right?
Hmm.
So I think people won't get better care until they are seen differently. And I think you keep coming back to this point about the training institutes. My experience in America is they weren't that critical. So when I was trained in London, we were trained to deconstruct the DSM.
Really?
So when I came to America and I had to learn how to use it again, right? But actually I realized it's actually not that bad. It's misused. In the DSM-5, it says categorically, this is a diagnostic manual, it's not formulation.
Right.
Just because we get a broad diagnostic of where someone is at because of their presentation, that's not the formulation. That's just one tiny part. If you're using it properly, I think people, they come into clinic, they have an intake, they tick the boxes and they're given a diagnosis, right? That's not how it's meant to be used.
Right.
That's just one tiny part of the overall formulation in terms of how someone is looked at. Social work used to emphasize the positive. It used to emphasize the environment. Um, I think people are social workers and other professionals. They're sucked into the medical model. Why? Because it's
Yes.
easy, it's quick. Who doesn't want certainty?
Well, that's sad to me too, because I always felt that when I was on the other end, the social workers were the ones who were the most humane. And I enjoyed that they were a little bit more, they dealt with you a little bit more as a person.
Oh, I wanted to say something to you about
Yeah,
bipolar.
please.
Here's a great example. I was referred a guy, really complex situation. He was using opiates, young guy, very creative. First session, I said to him, "My God, you're a superstar." He said, "I said I was a superstar to the previous therapist, and they told me I had bipolar."
Yeah. Yes.
So that in that little one thing, people their experience can be limited by how the other person views them. I recently said in a presentation, if you have any sort of synchronicity experience, don't see a therapist who doesn't understand synchronicity.
Yes.
That would be my first piece of advice, right?
Yes.
You're looking for
100%.
someone who has a little bit of a flavor of a shaman,
Yes.
right? Not someone who is so wedded to scientific materialism that synchronicity doesn't even come into it, right?
Right.
You need people who are in the territory.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that's, one of the things that's happening is that a lot of people who have had religious experiences or spiritual experiences or emergencies, they call them, they are uniting. There's a lot of people coming together talking about this. Right. We're in a very important time right now. And you brought up in your paper AI as well, artificial intelligence.
Mm.
Everyone's now thinking like, oh, is AI conscious or whatever? Does it have sentience? All this stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, so now we live in a world where we think that robots have consciousness before humans do, because a lot of these people who are like not acknowledging consciousness, they'll deny their own consciousness while committing to that idea
Mm.
that we are separating consciousness, like we are not conscious entities. We don't have agency. This is coming from the tech giants, okay, that have now decided that we're all going to be under this AI world. And this is probably about 5 years away. Okay.
Mm.
So like I am concerned because I've been having by the way, just so you know my background, I've been having visions about AI since 1994. And this is what kept getting me into these states. And I've recorded all of this, and now it's pointing to literally the time period we're in. Now we're in a state in America where we're losing our democracy. And, people are still medicated. So it is a point of concern for me. I've been, like I said, talking about this for a long time, and every time I spoke, it was like, oh, she's a crazy person.
So if you go further into your relationship with your mind, small m, capital M, I promise you'll be less worried about AI,
Thank you. Okay, I hear you on that one.
which opens the door for me to bring in. I don't think the Western model of the mind is sufficient. I think you need to incorporate the East.
Yes, yes.
And where I got to this on my own journey was I just couldn't understand why spiritual teachers who I perceived as having some degree of insight or wisdom would do terrible things to their students.
Yeah.
This this just troubled me. I just couldn't understand. And then when I looked at the two models, the Western idea of health is this idea of a healthy self, ego strength, good, healthy, consistent individual. So it has a limitation in terms of the mind and the self and the universe. The East, and I'm thinking if you pick out, say, Tibetan Buddhism, it doesn't believe in the self.
Mm.
So if you don't believe in the self, then you don't have to look at the shadow,
Hmm.
which means that you don't have to look at your own shadow aspects. So I think you need a integration of both in order to
Mm.
really to liberate. So when I say that about AI, I don't say that glibly or to discount your concern. And I've seen many people, many survivors who have had really valid things and sort of nearly predictions about the future and it being shut down, right? But we can only start where we are. And I think the the tech pros, right, are not our friends, right? They want the singularity.
Right.
Many of them, they think technology is superior.
Yeah.
To me, they fundamentally don't understand what it means to be human,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? There was a guy, Dreyfus, he used to teach at MIT, and about 30 years ago, he was a Heidegger scholar, and he used to try and tell the AI guys, look, you've got this wrong. Your whole conception of what it means to be human is wrong. They used to lift their trays and sit at different tables. They just didn't want to hear. There's been a history of projecting our humanity onto machines and
Yeah.
giving it more. Now, it's a threat. My goodness, it's a threat, right? But in terms of the difference between humanity and machine, I think if you delve further into your own consciousness, the difference will become apparent,
Mm.
and the threat will be less.
You can definitely see the issues from a lot of angles and a lot of facets of this. And you say there's a book that's coming out?
Yeah.
Okay, when is this coming out?
Haha. Don't know yet.
Okay. All right. So when it does, please let me know because or I will.
Why don't I come back when it comes out?
Yes.
I'll give you an exclusive. How's that?
Oh, that'd be great. I don't want an exclusive. You should be everywhere.
Yeah.
But still, like this is I always was so like inspired by the way you have such a understanding of the problems, but also a willingness to go about a different path in a field that is high pressure to be one way. And it's so important because it's true. What I got from the ISPS conference at that time was that the way it's going to change is from the inside out. Right.
Mm.
That's how it works. I mean, we can say, oh, give us our rights and all this. But in the end, it takes a long, long time. The only reason why I was able to effectively get off of meds because I found Delano, I found all these people who were working on that. And I also was getting, I'm giving this to you. I decided to do it during COVID because I have the extra money from the government that was being given to us as a stimulus so that we could survive. And I took that money and started, giving it to people who could help me taper, who were like independent people out of the system. And I designed a whole program because I said to myself, all right, I'm surviving COVID. So but I know I can't survive like another extra 20 years on this medication. So this is it. Like I'm done. I'm healed in so many ways. I don't need a support system. Like I don't even need chemicals in my body. And it was the best thing I ever did. And at the same time, I want to just say to anybody listening who's thinking about doing that, please don't do it quickly. You do need help. And I know that medication also does have a place. So I do appreciate you making that as a starting point
Mm.
because it's not like the medication itself is the problem. The negligence occurs when professionals refuse to help people get off this medication. And I did it effectively because there were enough psychiatric survivors who gave their information to other psychiatric survivors that are now on the internet telling us how to do this. In fact,
Mm.
Mark Horowitz, who published like a how to taper off of antipsychotics before he actually published his other thing with Joanna Moncrief about the chemical imbalance theory being inaccurate. He talks about this ratio, which is like 10% of the previous, you take 10% reduction of the previous month's dose. That was designed, that was illuminated by people who gathered all of those psychiatric survivor um that all that data that we put forward. So this has been possible. My new life has been possible not because of the system that stands. It's
Mhm.
because of breaking. I had to break away from the system that stood.
Yeah, I think the quickest way to get more medication in America is to tell a psychiatrist you'd like to come off your meds.
Yes, that is exactly right.
But if people are listening, it's also important to say, you know, people can often get excited and inspired. They often taper too quickly.
Absolutely.
So I would say before you ever think of tapering, I've helped many, many people taper, right? You need the information, you need to know whether it's the right time, you need to have the
Yes.
support. You have to be very aware. For some people, I know people have come up and it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
For other people, there's a kickback, there's a withdrawal,
Yeah.
there's a rebound. Um, I'll be honest and transparent with you. When I lived in Malaysia, there's a lot less sort of regulation and stuff. My number one intervention was taking people off psychiatric meds.
Hmm.
So I learned from hands on. I couldn't do it. Obviously, in America, it's not my place, but I could there, and I was able to take responsibility for it. The
Wow.
issue here is, you talk about power. You see, in England back in the day, um, someone couldn't be involuntary placed in hospital by a psychiatrist. The social worker, it was a dual signature. So the
Ah.
so the psychosocial argument was always there on the paper. So we worked much more closely with the
That's
psychiatrist
nice.
in partnership. My examples here, I've had somebody. So what happens often I see here, somebody goes into hospital and they're given a cocktail of meds, which may be appropriate at the time to try and get them into some sort of stability, right?
Yeah.
You can argue that or whatever. But then they're discharged. They're often discharged on the same cocktail,
Right.
right?
Right.
I'm not a psychiatrist to know that's a nonsense, right? Because either the meds have done something or they haven't.
Yeah.
Somebody's either
Yeah.
settled, somebody's settled enough to be discharged. If they're settled enough to be discharged, then there should be a review of the medication. So what happens is they go into community mental health care. The prescriber there keeps the person on the same meds, right? Now, what I have witnessed is an antipsychotic, lithium, a stimulant, an antidepressant,
Oh,
and something else, right? So I've advocated this person's worked with me for 2 years, twice a week. It's now stable. Why aren't you tapering off the meds?
yeah.
Don't do it. Won't budge. The prescriber changes. New prescriber. Within a week, they've started to taper the person off because it depends on the individual. In my view, they shouldn't have that power, right? They
Right.
should not have that power over the individual. Someone of my experience and credentials should be able to call them out on it.
Right.
But we attribute far too much power to the prescriber,
Yes.
and they don't. They're not trained to think clinically or critically in that
Yeah.
regard.
Right.
So I think, again, it's people being on if they need medication and they feel it's working, it's to be on the dose that is appropriate,
Yeah.
right? But that's an example of how people get stuck and how they get stuck in sort of this web of polypharmacy.
Yeah.
People. I'm seeing someone. I'd like to see someone a minimum of twice a week, right? So I'm seeing somebody twice a week for a couple of hours, compared to a registered nurse who's seeing somebody for on average 14 minutes.
Yeah.
So who do you think has a better handle on someone's mind
Mm-hmm.
and lived experience and life?
Yeah.
I know who I would want to have on my side. And that's no disrespect to the prescriber. That's the situation they've been put in a
Right.
McDonaldized system.
Right.
Farm them through. We need numbers. Used to be a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. Okay, how do we McDonaldize this? Well, we de-skill the psychiatrist. We put in registered nurses. They can do these certain things so we can see more people.
Yeah.
We can see like 4 people an hour instead of one.
But that's it. It's like who's getting properly served.
If my chest, my pneumonia hasn't cleared up, and I go and see the registered nurse, and she can give me a re-prescription, that's fine.
Yeah.
But when it's medication that completely can alter your mind
Yeah.
and your heart, right? Let's not forget, people with serious presentations die between 15 and 25 years earlier than the
Yeah.
average person.
Right.
Right? That is of huge concern. So,
Right.
so it's not just some sort of ideology. It's actually people are having really bad outcomes here. So there's a responsibility to go right back and go, look, what are we actually doing here in terms of prescribing? Can we do this better?
Yeah.
To me, that doesn't take too much.
Right.
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 If I'm in a clinic fighting with all these prescribers, if we got everybody else fighting, right, then everyone's consciousness would be raised to the point of we can do much better here.
Yeah.
Doesn't take a lot, right? We used to think smoking was good for us.
Right. I mean, and here's the thing, like nobody's looking to take anyone's jobs away. We're looking for a better fit for the human being, right? In today's culture. In today's
Yep.
we're supposed to be further along evolutionarily, right? We have to get to this place where we can take care of ourselves and take care of each other. So I just thank you so much for your work and your vision and your understanding and your commitment to getting this information out there and your commitment to just on the inside, the nitty gritty, helping one person at a time. Because I know that you're making a difference. Just your approach is exactly what's needed in overall, reboot of the system. So I really do appreciate it. And I want to bring attention just to one more thing. This group that you're in called Peacefire.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So, what I wanted to do was bring 10 Americans to Belfast, 5 sort of Democrat leaning and 5 Republican leaning. And this was inspired by something that Carl Rogers did in the 70s. He basically brought 9 people to Philadelphia and he recorded an encounter group. And more or less, these individuals from Belfast in the height of the Troubles, they more or less sort of solved the conflict. And the idea was that video would be shown and, they'd have workshops around it, but the paramilitaries didn't like it. And they were like stealing the video and burning the video and all this sort of stuff. But what happened was, as I was researching this, one of the original members of Carl Rogers' team was still alive, a guy called Pat. And it just coincidentally turned out it was the 50th anniversary of this video.
Oh my gosh.
So what happened was I ended up putting it's called the Steel Shutter. You can still see it online. What happened was I ended up putting on the 50th anniversary conference in Belfast. So I did this like peace conference.
Awesome.
And the energy that I had to do it was called the Encounter, USA Encounter. It sort of went on the back burner. But I have in my life done a lot of sort of peace building work and working with people, sort of teaching people how to speak to their enemies. Really, I was born with I was born with 3 curses. Right, first one has been able to see both sides of the argument. The other one was to see people's deep trauma, and the other one's to spot talent.
No,
and I can't turn any of them off. So I think peacemaking and peace building is a complex area, but I felt that I was being triggered by what I was seeing in America. It reminded me of growing up in the Troubles.
Yeah,
so I could see this polarization happening, and it felt really, really familiar.
Yes.
And I got really scared when it started to seep into education, because what happened in Ireland was you had segregated education. The Catholics were educated in one school and the Protestants were educated in the other. Once that happens, you completely other
Yeah.
The other goes to the other school. They're
Right.
different. They're
Right.
they're learning different things. They're learning different ideology. That is a really, really scary place
Yeah.
to be in. So I think when politics and ideology seep into the classroom,
Yeah.
you should be very, very concerned. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, so I'll give you a great example of this. This is the sort of thing I observe, and it's slightly political but it's about peacemaking, right? When
Hmm.
when Hillary Clinton called the Trump supporters deplorables, I knew she didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
Because what I realized that she didn't understand was that those people that she was calling deplorables were at a different level of development than perhaps she was.
Right.
So I don't see, if you take, I'm not saying this, but if you take an issue of racism, right? I see racism as a developmental issue.
Yeah.
So if you think of a tribal consciousness versus a global consciousness or a
Mm.
universal consciousness, if I have a universal consciousness, racism isn't going to come into it.
Right.
If I have a more of a tribal consciousness, then racism is going to come into it,
Yeah.
right? So,
That's brilliant.
so I think what, unfortunately, from a peacemaking point of view, we can't call anyone we think deplorable deplorable. We
Yes.
need to we need to reach our hand out,
Right.
right? There is no conflict that ends without some sort of dialogue, even if it's just signing the peace treaty in the First World War. You still have to come around the table and
Absolutely.
communicate and sign it. But I think that we need to help everyone raise their consciousness. Why this has become a huge problem, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to tell you this very quickly.
Mm.
20 years ago, I was really excited about postmodernism. I thought postmodernism was a way to liberate, right? So if you deconstruct, the law and these different ideas that have oppressed the minority, there's an opportunity for freedom. And then I said I'd kind of forgotten about postmodernism for 20 years. And then I started hearing this language of postmodernism. I thought something has shifted here.
Mm.
When I was into postmodernism was about challenging dominating hierarchies.
Mm.
20 years later, postmodernism was about all hierarchies are wrong. So I'll give you an
Mm.
example. 20 years ago, postmodernism, patriarchy, right? Patriarchy, well, it's really exciting. Yeah, look at this, look at what's happening. How can we sort of, maybe loosen that somehow? 20 years later, I started picking up all men are bad,
Yeah.
all
Right.
heterosexual
Yeah.
white men are bad. It's like, whoa, hang on, whoa, 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 what's happened here?
Right. Right.
So that's a slight issue. What the bigger issue is, if you destroy all hierarchy, you destroy developmental hierarchy.
Yes.
You destroy the idea that maybe some people are slightly more evolved.
Yeah.
Maybe some people have knowledge, spiritual
Right.
knowledge, right?
Yes.
Maybe some people's minds are actually at a state where actually compassion just flows from them.
Yeah.
For me, that was what was thrown out, and it was thrown out in this sort of nihilistic way. I think we need to get into this idea of actually being kind is an evolved, raised, hierarchical level of consciousness, and we should
Yes.
aspire to it.
Yes.
So when it comes to politics, and I know that before we came on, this is of deep concern to you, I think we can only change the planet when we raise our consciousness. That would be my
Yes.
belief. There's
Yes.
no political system that's going to change it.
Right.
It's when we realize dehumanizing someone and treating them badly is not good for the planet.
Right.
It's not good for us.
Right.
And unless we see the interconnectedness of all things,
Hmm.
only when we start to get a flavor of that are we going to treat people differently.
Yeah. I really appreciate that because it's one of the things that I came across in reevaluating my experience with, say, hierarchical, relationships because my son is a white boy and he's 18 and
Yeah,
he had pushback from me,
yeah,
with like, Ma, like everyone's against me. And I'm like, oh, like that's not good. Wait, hold on. He's not the problem.
yeah,
So it I do believe that this is what we're dealing with now, going so far in the other direction that we have to pull back and just go back to that, just simplifying, treating humans with respect. If we start there, I think a lot of us can overlap with agreement,
Yeah. With
So,
more in common than not.
yeah,
Well, just on the white issue, as somebody who grew up in Ireland, a country that was colonized by the British for hundreds of years,
yeah,
and we were second class citizens
yeah,
to the English, and to be put into that box is super, super reductive.
huh, yeah,
So yeah, we could talk about that a lot. But yeah, I think of course we have see being a peacemaker, when I meet Republicans and I meet Democrats, it's like, wow, you've just so much in common, right?
right.
What happened here? Well, the internet happened here,
Yes,
and
yes,
algorithms happened here,
yes,
and the worst of humanity becoming politicians happened here,
yeah,
right? Who are divisive and self-serving, and
yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah,
What
I think the media is a big problem. I mean
it's, it's
is
it's a
it's a huge problem, and we
huge
have no
problem.
laws that allow for objectivity anymore in journalism. And then that happened in the 80s that they took those away in America. So,
Yeah.
like when you do that, and then you have billionaires running the media,
Well,
there's
in the early 90s, I worked in a newspaper in Belfast, and I was always challenging. I used to challenge the reporters because they would report a story that propagated the conflict, but it was much more complicated than that.
yeah,
They weren't interested in the truth. They were
yeah,
interested in their version of a story. So
yeah.
even before technology, not all journalists, but journalists contribute. I remember the Dalai Lama dressing down journalists in Belfast when it was part of the peace process. They have a responsibility.
Yes.
And unfortunately in America, a lot of journalism's entertainment.
Yeah, right. And now they just brazenly say so. So it's, we're all worried about what we're getting. Also, it's like I'm trying to reach out to international communities. Like, what are you seeing? Because, you know, I know that the best things that I could trust right now are based on my algorithms, which are pathetic because it's like I'm getting social media stuff and then I'm trying to find that those the be- to the actual objective journalism to back up that stuff. And it's hard because it's like we're working backwards, but they're not showing everything on the regular TV. And what I am seeing on my social media, which right now I think is good that we're able to access that, are what people are actually independently recording, in terms of these ICE abductions. And so it's a scary time because America's so huge too that things can get lost. And I just don't want to live in a world where all of this, abuse to humanity is occurring in this country that I always had such high, esteem for with our constitution and everything. I knowing that I was fighting that for years and it only goes so far, and if people don't know about it, it's just sad to me. So I'm trying to gather as much as possible and try to develop like an independent network because I don't really trust our social media platforms anymore either in terms of like, you know, Zuckerberg and Musk, I mean it's all being funneled to the government as well because of the tracking devices. So, when I say devices, I mean setups. These are perfectly that we are in a perfect era for this to happen in terms of surveillance, in terms of, and the thing is, when I tell you that I have been surveyed my whole life. So I know what this is. I mean, there have been times when I've been taken away and I'm thinking, were they tracking me? Like how did they even know that I was
Mm.
doing that? So I I am concerned about our future, but at the same time I am extremely hopeful because what I'm seeing is that people care. And people are trying to record this stuff, and people are being activists out there. And there's so much, foot traffic on the ground, people taking to the streets. My family was from Italy, but I have been, was raised and born as an American. And I just feel that this could potentially be the time period that Americans actually have to fight on their land for our democracy. And that's a beautiful thing because it means so much more. A lot of people feel that we've just been given these freedoms and we are entitled to that, but that's not how democracy works. So I am witnessing now for the first time in my life in a long time that people are actually exercising their democratic rights and trying to unite. So I'm hoping that continues that effort. But I do come at it from a point of I've been fighting for the rights of the mentally ill, and now I have to kind of go in the direction of, fighting for our, neighbors who are being, put away in camps at this point. So
I think one of the problems in America is you were too far away from the Second and First World War.
Yeah.
So,
yes,
I grew up in Belfast, and every other house was a different type of house because it was one of the most blitzed places in the Second World War because of the shipbuilding and aircraft. When you're that close to it, you realize it can tip over.
Yeah.
Really, really easier. And I think that you make the point, people don't realize how free they are until their freedom's taken away.
That's right.
And I think in Europe, we had Bosnia, we had these different sort of conflict. 1 minute they're all sitting in houses with, Sky TV. Next minute there's genocide. So I think in Europe there's a much closer sense to where it could go really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And I think, there's generations in America that, to be honest, have lived very, very comfortably.
Oh, yes.
And haven't a lot of the activism is in theory, right? We're seeing last few years, we've seen a bit, but actually in terms of where it can go, in terms of conflict, you don't want to go there. That's basically. So peace, love, light, compassion, these are the things that you need to focus on. And I think you're very meta modern. You're hopeful and positive, but you're aware of where we're at. And I think that is the meta modern position.
Yeah.
In the recent talk, I said I get up in the morning and I mourn a little bit for the world, and then I enter the world with positivity because actually, what's the alternative?
Right. Absolutely. That's it. I mean, if you're walking, a container for that energy, that's the thing that's actually going to make the difference, because then you can help others find that space as well. And that can be contagious, So I see the time. I want to let you go.
We have to do this again. This is wonderful.
Oh my God, to the last minute. I'm so thankful. I am so thankful. Listen, Dr. Montgomery, I am so thankful that you came aboard. Please, is there anything that you would like, last few words to say to our audience? And if you could just give your handle and your website. Okay,
so I'm going through a big rebranding, so I hope it's going to be ready within the next sort of 48 hours. But I'm very lucky to have drmontgomery.com, so it couldn't be easier.
Great. And then where could people follow you on social media?
I don't do social media. That's why I'm so happy. Look at my face. Is this a face that does social media?
That's it. See, now you hear it.
Get out of the matrix.
All right. I like that advice.
Unplug and live like a human.
Absolutely.
I don't do social media. I'm under pressure, so I may do a bit when the book's coming out, but yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about the book in more detail.
When that book gets going, I want you back here. We're going to have another huge conversation, and I can't wait to read it because I know you have so much to give. Thank you so much.
Lovely to see you again. You take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.